Hi, Janet.
Hey, Joey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm sorry. I went to
It's
the
okay.
geezer hour. I went to the geezer hour at Price Chopper this morning and met people and had a ball. But I
Okay.
thought we were meeting at
Okay.
11:30, so I apologize.
That's fine. So we're all glad to be here, I guess, like this. And the meeting is now streaming on YouTube.
It is.
They didn't seem to have a lot of people watching the House Appropriations one, but we can have a few. So I guess we'll just call the meeting to order. Really appreciate people being willing to do the work we normally do in this really different way. And all the work that Saoirse and the tech people have done to get this functioning, because it is a lot of technology involved. And we're going to start. So just a couple of ground rules. I've been over this a little bit, but if you want to ask a question, you can do this. You can raise your hand. If you go to the bottom of your screen, there is a participant icon. And if you push that, you'll see a little raised hand thing on the side. Saoirse and I are going to do the best we can, figuring out who's in queue to raise hands. I've watched some of these other meetings. It's not the usual free flow of questions and answers that we're used to, just because the timing is a little awkward because we're not in the same room. We can't see each other, but it will work, and we'll get everybody's questions answered. And we'll have probably, haven't quite figured out the schedule for the week. I'm sort of inclined to think that we'll meet every morning from 10 to 11:30, or at least plan on that. And maybe not try to do the afternoon meeting. This is a tiring way to meet, so I'm going to try to see how we do with it. I really appreciate people's feedback. If you have concerns about the whether you can hear or not, something like that, you can send Saoirse a text, you can send me a text. As I said, Saoirse and I will do the best we can to keep track of who's in queue for questions. We are going to start with Craig Bolio, who has been doing a phenomenal amount of work with his team to try to make very quick decisions in a really difficult environment. Some of those decisions are administrative ones. Some of them are going to require us to act, and we're going to try to figure out the difference between the two today. So Craig, why don't you go ahead and start and tell us what's been going on, particularly with payment dates and filing dates and so on. And afterwards, Steve Klein is going to come and talk about revenue. So we'll have him give an overview.
Happy to, Madam Chair. Am I unmuted? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Good.
Okay, Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. Thank you for the time. And I figured if it would please the committee, I'll start with the impacts to income taxes. And then I will move into the meals and rooms and sales and use tax, and we can pause in between for questions if that works.
It's fine.
Okay, so there are a number of income tax due dates for the state of Vermont that have been moved automatically by a function of Vermont law. And they have moved in response to the IRS moving the federal due date. So this was something that was moving very quickly last week. Originally, the IRS had issued guidance that only the payment, only the payment date was extended for income taxes. And that would not on its own move Vermont law. But then Friday, the IRS clarified that they do actually have the power under a national emergency to move the due dates legally for personal income taxes, corporate income taxes. And so they chose to do that. And so those due dates are now July 15th federally. So what that means for Vermont, because the due dates were actually changed, is that the Vermont personal income tax year 2019 due date is moved from April 15th to July 15th. That in turn moves the due date for the Homestead Declaration and property tax credit claim also to July 15th, because the statute for that due date ties to the Vermont personal income tax due date, which has now been moved due to federal action. And it also changes the income tax due date for corporate income tax and fiduciary income tax, so trusts, from those that were due April 15th to July 15th. So interestingly, what the federal government is currently silent on are, for instance, corporations that would have been due May 15th if instead of their fiscal year ending at the calendar year end and having the normal April 15th due date, if instead their fiscal year ended in January and they had a May 15th due date. Currently, those due dates stand as they originally were. In addition to that, the IRS moved the first estimated payment due date, so tax year 20 estimated payment due dates that were originally April 15th. The IRS also moved those to July 15th. That does not automatically move those due dates from Vermont law, but I am intending to exercise the authority of the commissioner to forego penalties and interest for payments that come in for that first estimate before July 15th. Again, interestingly, what the federal government is currently silent on is the second quarterly estimated payment due date, which is June 15th, currently stands at June 15th. So I just threw a lot of info. I'm happy to pause there if that's useful for folks.
Let's see if people have questions. Saoirse, can you tell me how to, I've got everybody's picture running down the side, which means, oh, good. Now I can see people. Great.
Okay.
Anyone? Any questions? No? Okay. George.
George, let me unmute you.
I got it. I was just going to say, I found it incredibly distracting to have my screen changing when I wasn't doing it while Craig was talking. I just, so I think I probably missed half of what he said because crazy things were happening to my screen that I wasn't doing.
Yeah, so we're all getting used to this, and we can ask Craig to repeat the presentation if people need it. I had the same issue because I had everybody running down the side of my screen and I couldn't see what was written there. So
I think if you just give me a cue when you want me to share documents, I find it the same way, George, in other meetings when somebody's sharing a document, I find it very disconcerting, but it may be the only way you can see the presentations. So just let me know when you want to change back.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm happy to go over it again, Madam Chair. My screen was also changing, so I hope I didn't misspeak at all. Yeah, I'm happy to simply reiterate if that's useful.
You want to hear it again, George?
You're muted, George. What was up online was just
Only if other people need to hear it.
Okay.
Robin?
Fine with me to hear it again.
And Jim. So we've got a couple people who'd like to hear it again.
Sure.
Oh, Robin, do you have a question? Can you unmute?
There. So I didn't need to hear it again. What I was just going to say is, for what it's worth, I have my laptop I'm looking at with you guys, and then I have my iPad to the side. So that's where I'm putting the documents. Not everybody has two computers, but if you do,
Right.
that would be one way to do it.
Robin, fine with me to hear it again.
And Jim. So we've got a couple people who'd like to hear it again.
Sure.
Robin, do you have a question? Can you unmute? What that was somebody's playing the YouTube video and it's on a little bit of a delay. So you can mute the YouTube video if you have it up, please.
You hear me?
Yes, I
Okay.
can.
I'm
Go
doing the
ahead.
same thing as Robin. I've got laptop and iPad open side by side. So, I mean, it's fortunate if people can do that. You can listen and scroll down on Craig's presentation or anybody else's. So thank you for anybody who's posted their stuff in advance. It's making it very, very helpful.
I guess I'll ask the question, George. I don't know, are there people other than George who want to hear Craig go through the presentation again? No?
Looks like not.
Okay.
Well, I can just very briefly reiterate, but essentially just four due dates have moved from April 15th to July 15th as a function of Vermont law from the federal action. So that includes personal income tax, corporate income tax, fiduciary income tax, and then the Homestead Declaration. This is a good opportunity as well. I mean, the Homestead Declaration moving is clearly a challenge that we'll have to work through over the coming days and weeks, because many towns, I believe 70 towns, bill their property taxes in July. And generally speaking, from Vermont law, the tax department is required to have provided all the homestead declarations and property tax credit claims to the towns by July 1st to help facilitate that process of billing in July. So if they're not due until July 15th, there's a logistical challenge that we're going to have to work there through. And also keeping in mind that, you know, if the department gets them on July 15th and gets many of them on July 15th, it's going to take us a little time to process those as well. So we'll have to work through that. I have been in discussion with VLCT to at least let them know that this is a function of Vermont law, and so we can start having those discussions of how to address that. But that is definitely an ongoing challenge. I will move to the meals and rooms and sales and use tax deferral. So I think this is going to be a good opportunity because we had put out a press release yesterday. You know, what you always try to do is make the information as clear as possible so that most people can get a clear understanding of what you're saying. I have heard a few misconceptions since we put it out. So I'd like to talk about what it is and what it isn't. So what it is and what was announced was the tax commissioner utilizing the authority that is within my power to forego penalty and interest assessments on late filings for meals and rooms taxes that were going to be due this Wednesday and also April 25th for those businesses who are not able to meet those deadlines. So what it is not is an abatement or forgiveness of the tax owed. That actually is not within my authority. I don't have the authority to forgive or abate the tax once it's collected from the customer. Because remember, sales tax and meals and rooms tax are taxes on the customer that are collected by the business from the customer and then remitted to the state. So once those taxes are collected from the customer, I do not have the authority to forgive that tax. And I do not have the authority to refund that tax to the business unless they can demonstrate that they are going to refund it to the customers. Now, there are potentially other stimulus opportunities that exist for these businesses that are challenged, but that's a discussion that needs to happen with you folks in the legislature. The second thing that it is not canceling collections of these taxes moving forward. So businesses should continue to charge and collect the tax as they always have been. The announcement was only for forgiveness of penalty and interest on those filings if they come in late. And the third thing that it is not is a blanket extension of the due date. So again, I don't have the authority to simply move the due date for these taxes. I only have the authority to forgive penalty and interest. And so, you know, really to speak further to what that means practically is that there are some businesses that are in a place to file and pay by the due date now. And those businesses should continue to do so. What we acknowledged yesterday is that there's a very real set of economic and logistical challenges that exist for many smaller and local businesses today, that they are not able to meet these deadlines. Either they're not able to pay right now or they're not able to file and pay. And that we wanted to say, if you are a business in that position who has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, you don't have to worry about this deadline right now. But if you are a business who is in position to be able to file and pay, you should continue to do so. If you're a business who's in a position to simply file and not pay right now, you should continue to do so. And you know, just to put a little bit of parameters around that, you know, the larger corporations are the ones that we have a little bit of an expectation at this point should be in a position to continue to file and pay. And so we're going to monitor over the next couple of days to see how that shakes out as we pass the March 25th deadline. And I'm happy to, again, I've just thrown a lot of info out, perhaps pause there and offer any clarity or answer any questions if there are any.
Good. Let's see if there's questions. Raise your hand one way or another. Nobody? I guess I'll ask one question. If one of the concerns I had was the fact that businesses are not going to be required to file, but I can well understand the delay in the payment date. Although having it open-ended seems challenging, and it seems to me that the press release made it open-ended. But if we were to decide that businesses should file by X date, let's say April 15th, or pick a date, sometime sooner than later, do you think that's something that could be actually implemented at this point?
Yes, I do think so, Madam Chair. You are correct that the press release yesterday did not put a lot of parameters on the relief. The message yesterday was meant to just be, don't worry about Wednesday for now if you're a business that's affected. However, the intention was to engage with a conversation with the legislature to see what we all felt might be appropriate in terms of business size, in terms of timeline. The question about filing and not payment is one that I've gotten a couple of times. It's a fair question. So I do think that you know, if we agree that there are certain details and certain structure that we should put around this, we can come out with a subsequent announcement and try to execute on that. You know, one of the things that we want to monitor is to just see what happens as things stand in a couple of days, right? This may not materialize into a problem in terms of nobody filing or nobody filing and paying. So we want to see what the impacts are, right? Taxes are a voluntary system to begin with, right? And the tools that we have to help ensure that voluntary compliance are our collection and compliance efforts and penalty and interest provisions. So we're not quite sure what will happen exactly, given the state of the businesses and the economy right now. But we're going to monitor that closely and see if we do feel that we have an issue with that kind of information once we pass the due date here in a couple of days. Tomorrow, I guess.
If I'm looking around to see if others have questions. If not, I've got one more. Anyone else out there?
Robin is raising her hand.
Robin? Go ahead, Robin.
Okay, thank you. Would you just remind me, Craig, these are trust taxes, and when businesses collect the taxes, is there any requirement to keep them in a separate account anyway, or does it just get mixed up all in their regular checking operating account and then they extract it and pay for you?
I don't believe there's a legal requirement to keep it in a separate account.
Okay.
There's just a legal requirement if the money is collected that it must ultimately be remitted to the department.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else there? Looking around. Let me ask my question then. So if the decision were made to actually abate the tax, what would happen with all the payers, the businesses that have already paid?
So let's say that first of all, that would require legislative action to say that the tax is being abated. Yep. But let's say that the legislature made that decision. I think that your second decision at that point is going to be, are you abating it in such a way that the businesses are allowed to keep the money? Or are you abating it in such a way that the businesses have to refund it to the customers? You know, certainly there are logistical challenges with refunding it to all of the customers. I think that the legislature would have the power to provide some kind of relief on the tax if they so choose, and do it in a way that the business would be able to keep the money. But that would all have to be in statute.
So wouldn't we then have to refund the money to the businesses that have already remitted?
Correct.
That seems like maybe a challenge. Okay.
I mean, it's not a logistical challenge for the department to refund it to the businesses. There's about 3,000, 3,500 maybe that pay monthly. So it's not a lot of refunds to issue. And we have, maybe today, we've maybe got about a third of the payments.
Okay. Any other questions anyone has? No? Okay.
So just I think that the next steps for us and discussions that we'd like to have with you folks over the next days and weeks are on structure for deferral, on additional stimulus opportunities for these businesses, and then ongoing discussions about what's the best way to handle the homestead deadline moving. And then I'm not prepared to talk about any of these details today, but obviously we're closely monitoring both the federal bill that was passed before and ongoing discussions about federal stimulus to see how that interacts with Vermont, what's automatic, what's not, what our decision points are. So I'm happy to continue to engage in those discussions over the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Great. Let me just make sure nobody's raising their hand. Okay.
Hey, Janet, it doesn't look like Steve is on yet.
Okay.
So I think Graham is on. Graham, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me?
Did you want to go to Graham or Abby then, Janet?
Why don't, Abby, you've got a presentation on sort of, I think, why don't I go to you first and keep the two revenue presentations together, which are Graham and Steve.
Okay, so everybody, I would suggest going to the speaker view at this point because I'm going to move to speaker view and share Abby's presentation on the screen. And what should happen is we should only see the document and Abby's square in the corner until somebody else is speaking. So let's give that a try.
Before we go too far away, if you have a question, send a text. Is that right? Because it won't show.
No, yeah, you can send a text and I'll see if I can look in the tile
Okay.
as well. Sorry,
Okay.
it's taking me a moment to find where I was. That's not it. Okay, hold on. I apologize, I'm having trouble finding it. Abby, hold on. There we go.
Portia,
Yeah,
just so you know, my connection keeps going out. People are freezing. I miss big chunks of the presentation, and
okay,
I do not have the ability to text.
okay.
Okay.
You can call me if you need to.
Yep.
I apologize. For some reason, I'm not able to share this, Abby. So I'll keep working on that if you want to start. And those that have the documents next to you, Abby, if you could tell us which one to pull up, and I'll keep working on that. Sorry about that,
Okay.
guys.
All right. Go ahead, Abby.
Okay. Great. So good morning, everybody. I think just to follow on the commissioner's testimony, it would probably make the most sense to go with the tax issues and COVID-19 updated March 23rd document. If you can look at that on your own. I also have an iPad going and I'm looking to the side so I can look at my screen.
Okay.
Just to add on to the commissioner's what the commissioner explained about in terms of record keeping, I just quickly to answer your question, Representative Shy, about separate finance, separate keeping taxes and their own revenues separate. There are separate record keeping requirements, and I'm looking in particular at meals and rooms. Operators do have to keep separate books or records of their business. They have to keep those records for 3 years. There isn't a, segregating funds requirement though. I think that's what you were asking. So let me pull up. If we go back to, if we can just follow the order, it's slightly different than what we just went through. I don't know if you want me to talk more about trust taxes first, or if we should go through in this order. I think I'll just follow what's happening at the federal level.
That's fine.
If that's okay. So as you're all aware, the tax filing and payment deadlines have now been extended to the 15th of July, and it extends to income tax returns and payments, including payments on tax of self-employed that would otherwise be due April 15th. These have now been extended to July 15th. This also includes estimated payments, but again, it's only for those on April 15th. So currently it's silent in the federal guidance whether the June 15th deadline still applies. Just gonna look at my own screen that's projecting. In terms of the Vermont income tax deadlines, they automatically follow for personal, corporate, fiduciary. So this includes pass-throughs like S corporations or LLCs, other businesses that would otherwise file personal income taxes. So this is an automatic extension. It doesn't prevent individuals from filing earlier. And I think there has been some, in reading the news, there has been some emphasis on encouraging individuals to still file so that if they are expecting a refund, they can get it sooner. In my explanation here, oh, sorry, was there a question? No.
Here we go. Is there a question?
Okay.
No, we're good.
I'll keep going. So there are, most of the income tax filing and payment deadlines do automatically follow the federal deadline. The only one that does not in Vermont statute is estimated payments. So that's why this paragraph got a little long. It's just explaining that the estimated payment deadlines did require the commissioner to take action. And in the guidance that was just issued yesterday, those deadlines were also extended. So at this point, filers can file by April 15th, or they have until July 15th. However, again, for estimated payments, the June 15th deadline still stands. So this is only for those who would have filed by April 15th. Next, I can move on unless there are any questions to how this impacts property taxes.
Yep. Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yep.
So I actually, in this order, I wanted to just point out before we get off of, in the order that I set it up, I wanted to point out that default yields and rates will apply if the General Assembly does not take action. So we're talking about statewide education property tax. And I listed the yields from last year for the homestead rates and the non-homestead rates, but there are statutory defaults. So if there is no action, last year's rates will apply for the yields, and $1.59 per $1 will apply for non-homestead. And I believe Representative Till is waving at me.
Sorry, I'm trying to communicate with Steve Klein. So sorry, go ahead, George.
I was just gonna, I can't seem to control the document. And I was just gonna ask Sorcia to move it up to where we're talking about.
Okay, sorry, George. Yeah, you can't control the document. So Abby, if you notice I'm off, please let me know. Okay. All right.
Sure. So this is still on the first page. It's at the bottom of the first page.
Okay, hold on.
And it explains what the yields will be if there's no action by the General Assembly. And that would be for fiscal year 21.
Okay.
Yes, that's right there. Okay. If we scroll down to the second page, it starts with a bolded Homestead Declaration. And as the commissioner mentioned, this is an automatic extension along following the federal extension, because to file a homestead, it typically has to be filed on the date of the Vermont personal income tax return, and that is automatically linked to the federal income tax return deadline. So that has also been automatically pushed out to July 15th. Again, filers can file now or before April 15th, but they have now until July 15th. I don't know if there are any questions there. This obviously has a lot of impacts on, this could have some impacts on property tax credit claims, and then on town deadlines. And as I go on, this, what I have spoken about, I think Mark Perot may touch on this as well, but I'm mainly looking at issues that have come up and questions I've been fielding, and where there might be areas where the legislature could act.
I think we'll go into this in more detail when Mark speaks to us.
Great. Switching to municipal property tax. Going down, thank you, Sorsha. One thing that the Vermont League has highlighted is that they anticipate an increase in abatement requests, and towns are given authority to abate. A fairly broad authority is given to the boards of civil authority to abate in whole or part taxes, water charges, sewer charges, interest or collection fees, or any combination of those. And there's a particular provision for persons who are unable to pay as grounds for providing an abatement under Title 24. There is also a general hardship where a taxpayer is unable to pay or is prevented from filing a correct homestead declaration. And towns may also abate a portion of the penalty that's appealable, penalty and interest that's arising out of a corrected homestead to non-homestead. So that second type of abatement is not as broad, but it is an area where, because of later filing, confusion, just the change in all of the deadlines could lead to a greater increase in abatement requests. There is no exact corresponding authority for the state to allow abatements of statewide education property tax. There is a provision that when a town has abated under the Title 24, Section 1535 process, the commissioner may use his discretion to allow a statewide abatement. However, it's under very limited circumstances, which could potentially be triggered given the COVID-19 pandemic. But again, this is a very limited authority to where the commissioner has taken over billing because a town either hasn't sent notices of the statewide education property tax being due before August 1st, which again could potentially happen under the extended deadlines, or if a town has failed for more than 90 days after the town's installment payment deadline to collect the statewide education property tax. So this is one area that has come up as a potential area of change or expansion that would need legislative action to be able to apply. I'm going to pause there and take any questions.
It looks like we're okay.
Okay.
Yep.
One other area that I wanted to highlight, because again, there's been concern about taxpayers not being able to pay and what happens to the town, that municipalities are required to pay. Their payments are due half in December, half in June. If towns are not timely in their payments of the statewide education property tax to the state, they are subject to 8% interest. Additionally, there is an even stronger sort of stick. If a payment is more than 3 months overdue, any state funds due the municipality shall be withheld. So it's a requirement that, whereas we're hearing that penalty and interest may be able to be generally abated under the Commissioner of Taxes general authority, it's not as clear that withholding of state funds without a legislative mandate would be able to be prevented. So there are some fairly strong deadlines and requirements and sort of sticks in statute when it comes to property taxes. And if there aren't any questions there, I can go to the last page, which returns to the trust tax issues that have been discussed, unless anyone has questions.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
This lays out, and I apologize, there's some extra sites that shouldn't be in there, and some IDs. This explains the statutory basis for the commissioner only being able to waive penalties and interest and not actually abate the trust taxes. So there is a broad administrative authority given to the commissioner to waive, reduce, or compromise the taxes, penalties, and interest or other charges or fees within his jurisdiction. But in terms of trust taxes, when the customer is the one paying the tax and the department is collecting it from a vendor or an operator or a restaurant, the abatement cannot go directly to that operator or vendor unless there were a different legislative intent and statutory action to allow that type of direct abatement. The commissioner, as he has mentioned and you've all seen, is abating penalties and interest. So that effectively delays the payment. My reading is that collections are still required because the statute only allows, for sales tax and meals and rooms tax, only allows refunds or credits if they were erroneously, illegally, or unconstitutionally collected or paid for sales tax, or erroneously or illegally collected or computed for meals tax. So unless there's, a sale that was not taxable for which tax was collected, then that tax should be under current statute collected.
Okay, let me see if there's questions. Kind of can see what's going on here. Anyone? No.
I don't see any, Janet.
No, I don't either. Okay. Abby, thank you for very thorough presentation. So I appreciate it. So I think if there aren't any immediate questions about what Abby's given us, let's go to Steve for an update on revenue.
Okay, thank you. Sorcha, do you have the document? Should we put that up, or do you want me to I can just talk from it either way? As I quietly get organized here. Hold on a minute. Okay, this is Steve Klein from Joint Fiscal, and I just want to say I appreciate all the time and effort you're putting into this. It's, as you will hear again from all the presenters, I mean, this is an incredibly rapid changing world. And one of the things, I'm going to go over a document that was created yesterday. The revenues have changed dramatically since yesterday, and we'll discuss that. There's really, what I thought I'd do is first go over the revenue thing and then go over some of the appropriations issues. And maybe I'll stop it several times in the chair, or others can let me know if there's questions. I don't think I have the screen to see hands. So maybe I can, so I'm going to rely on maybe Sorcha if there are hands.
So
First of all,
Steve,
there's 5 areas. Is that okay?
Yes,
Sorcha?
Steve, when you stop for questions, I'll stop the share so I can see everybody's feed,
Okay,
and then we'll go back to the document.
great. Yes. So
I think what you're showing is my document, not Steve's. Is that what he asked for?
right. So that's correct. We probably should show mine. It's yeah, that's right. The top one, fiscal office COVID update. Yes. Great. Okay, thank you. And so what we've done is on this document, I divided the revenues into really 5 areas because they were following. And I just want to, and we think about that as 5 areas because the solutions may be different for each of those 5 areas. The first is this sort of federal and state tax filing collection postponement. The number and the value of this shift on this memo was about 145 million. I think We think that number has risen since then as we do more work, maybe closer to 170, but I'm not sure. And Graham can go into that. And this has to do with the money that's shifting from FY20 to FY21. The concept here is, since it's a shift, the response can be different. It can be knowing that it'll come in. Do we use reserves and repay us, and those types of things come up. The solutions can be different. The second issue I just want to mention is this whole thing that happened yesterday, which the rooms and meals and sales tax, that shift at this point, and again, Graham will talk more about that, is internal to the fiscal year at current. The assumption is that the money will be repaid in May and June. That's an iffy assumption, and we're going to let Graham talk more about that. The second big category we talk about is revenue impacts on the three major funds for the remainder of FY20. And when this was written, we had assumed pretty much the general fund was neutral. It's now projected to be down between $50 and $60 million. The big change is we looked at corporate, and there's now Tom and Jeff have done some work indicating that'll be down. They've looked at the income withholding, and that is another area where we're going to see some further downs. And the whole thing about this 50 to 60 million, or whatever the number is, it's probably not down far enough, because we haven't really looked at the provider tax and what's going to happen with that one, even if we don't change the rules about what has to be paid. I mean, when we got rid of when elective procedures are not being done, that may affect the provider tax. We haven't looked at cigarette tax as much, and which way that'll go is unclear. The budget is also built on a lot of direct apps, and I think last year, year before, you dealt with liquor control, and given what's going on with restaurants and things like that, we may not get the direct app in that we thought we would in that area. So there's a lot of pressure that the general fund number could be down further. Maybe I should take a quick break there and see if there's anything. I just keep going through revenues.
Good. We'll look and see if we see anybody. Questions? I don't think so.
Great. Well, let me finish the
Sam,
revenues.
do you have a question?
Oh.
Sam?
No, I think he's just.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So
I was just going to jump in and emphasize the fact that all you're talking about here is fiscal 20.
Right, and that was my next point. I just, as we go through the general fund, and we're talking about this down of 50 million or whatever it is, 50, 60 million. That part of the reason it's so low is we do have offsets. We had 35 million of corporate offsets that are one time that are this year. But the larger point the chair just mentioned is this is all about 3 months. When you think about that, and I mean, we can all do the math. We don't know how long this is going to last in the next fiscal year, but the potential for this being way larger in FY21 is absolutely there. And when we talk about the transportation fund being down 30 to 40 and the education fund 35 to 45, again, we're looking at a 3-month timeline. The risk is huge. I've been just warned that I have to mute something because you may be getting a double feedback. I don't know. Is this clear to you all? Or are you? Let me take a minute to figure out how I mute something. I've been told to mute.
Okay.
All right, we'll keep going, and then I will hopefully it won't be too bad. So the general fund, we talked about transportation fund, down 30 to 40 million. Some of that is the registration fee postponement year over year. Some of it is rooms and meals. I'm not sorry, purchase and use, gas tax, items like that. The education fund, and between Graham and Mark and the Winduet, the 35 to 45 million this year. again, it's going to be affected. This whole question about the within the year transfer of not paying rooms and meals and sales tax until May. That's a major issue. The other question will come up is if people can't afford to pay it today in May or June, will they be any better off? Will we lose some of that as we postpone it when the bill gets bigger? And these are all issues. But I think the overriding concern is whatever we do now, keep in mind that in a few months you will be dealing with a potentially much larger concern, and we'll talk about that more down the road. Going to and then we've just talked about the FY21 picture. Sorsa, if you want to slide up. One of the key issues for FY21 is it's going to be really hard to build an FY21 estimate until probably late August, September. And that's a real issue we haven't really begun to think about. Normally what we do is we have a July estimate, but given that the personal income filings are being postponed until July, that we are now going to see a lot of revenue uncertainty throughout funds until July. At that point, the forecasters are going to need to have some time to work. And even the other problem is that we just don't know how long the sort of complete uncertainty is in place. So we will have to, as we build a budget as we build a spending plan for next year, build in the flexibility to maybe postpone the forecasting, maybe operate in a provisional forecasting mechanism. And so that's another complication that we're all dealing with. On the federal side, I just want to flag.
Steve,
Yep.
can I
Yep.
stop you there? I
Yep.
just want to be sure I understand what you're saying about the forecast.
Yeah.
Normally, so we built fiscal 21. We build fiscal 21 alpha January forecast, right? And then normally we come back in July and we update it. Is that correct?
Yes.
And putting aside fiscal 22, I'm just thinking about fiscal 21. What I think I hear you saying is that we won't be able to update that January forecast until September.
I think it's late August, September. And the issue is that the big issue for updating, and one of the big issues is that normally in April, we get all the filings, and so we can close the calendar year 19 tax information. So when you're building the forecast in July, you're building it off of a real sense of what did happen in that year. Now that we're pushing the filing into July, we really won't have that information to build a forecast on. The second thing is there'll be a lot of uncertainty with the payments of some of the sales, rooms and meals and issues like that. While some of the money might come in early, some will come in late. All of the sort of normal tracking mechanisms and payment trajectories are really at sea at this point. The third thing is just the point that the overall uncertainty between federal aid and federal assistance, what's going to be going on in the economy is another area where we don't know when that's going to level off or stabilize. So if you were to have Tom on the phone, he'd probably say September. I think August, September is the period. And this is a whole question. I mean, we always build a forecast, and we've built it many years in times of where we've had to take levels of uncertainty, but plug a number in. But this is probably a year where we can't even do that. It's there's too much uncertainty.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so federal funds, I just want to flag, and the federal action will also go to,
Janet,
I don't know.
I'm sorry, it looks like Sam has his hand up.
Okay, and also is the screen document, I guess that'll come up later, is it?
No, I'm just looking, Janet, Sam has a question.
Yeah,
Okay.
Sam, do you have a question? What? Sam?
No, it looks like he took his hand down.
I think he's using the iPad.
Yeah, he had his little hand up.
Oh,
though.
now he has his hand up. Okay. Sam. No, he doesn't. Okay. No questions, it looks like. Okay, Steve. go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so on the federal side, we're really into our third federal relief bill. The first one was 4.9 million that really focused on the public health crisis, telehealth testing and state preparedness. Last week's bill, the big thing was Medicaid, where we ended up getting 38 million for the remainder of FY20, and then roughly 19 million a quarter after that, for as long as this crisis is in place. Most of that money will be utilized in AHS to deal with those issues. It's really helpful, but given the size of the problem, it's not a. It's going to be. It's going to make a difference, but it's obviously not changing any of the trajectories. The bill that's being considered right now, we have heard one of the big issues is how much state assistance, or if they provide state assistance. And that's a huge unknown. The numbers are from none to 300 million. So for Vermont, so I just as a range, we just don't know. That's going to make a large difference in our ability to respond to the crisis. So it's one of the things we have to follow is that it'll be, our hope is today they settle on a bill, and usually what happens is that several days before we really can move that to a Vermont number, and then often way beyond that, we need to deal with the federal agencies to understand the nuances of that number, given there may be rules and regulations that get put in place on how that impacts us. One of the things that I'm really not spending a lot of time on, but is the whole issue of unemployment insurance and how that bill helps us in that area, or how that bill helps people. As you know, Vermont has a fairly high number of people who are self-employed. And this is a huge issue. They haven't paid into the unemployment system, but their vulnerability is tremendous. So will the federal government provide some sort of resource there? That's one of the big questions. Does the state put money into that? Another question. If we do, I think the numbers are between close to 40,000 people are in that category. And if you do, you can quickly burn through what's right now is a pretty well-funded unemployment fund. So it's an issue to consider. So what I'm going to do is maybe I should stop there before I shift into the.
Okay.
Oh, and then also we're dealing with one more thing, which is we're dealing with the many bills that are being proposed now and that affect revenues and spending. So that's another sort of revenue piece that I wanted to flag. But at that point, why don't I stop with the revenues before I move into appropriations?
Okay, let me see if there's any questions. Anyone? Sorcha and I are looking. No. Okay.
Great. Okay. So in addition to this revenue decline, one of the things that's coming up is the what are the state needs, the budget adjustment needs that we're facing, and the number that we're hearing about, the number we're sort of thinking about from the administration and the legislative side is between $40 and $70 million of additional appropriations that might be needed to address this COVID-19. Again, this is going to be tremendously impacted by what comes through on the federal level. What I hear is a list of just some of the things that have been talked about, and it's certainly not inclusive. Yesterday, the issue came up that the higher ed community has a pretty substantial, maybe 5 million or more needs also. So things are constantly entering it. And just to give you a sense of what's out there, the unemployment insurance we pretty much talked about, and job protections, issues like that. If people can't work because of family or medical need, homeless protection, homeless needs, both for those who are homeless due to financial pressures and for those impacted by COVID-19. One of the difficulties is if one person gets COVID-19 in a family setting or an institutional setting, what do you do? How does that affect what do you do with that person? And many times they stay at home, but there are other issues where things could come up. Child care and foster care systems are among the many human service systems under tremendous stress. Hospitals and other facilities are experiencing immediate stress. When we limited the elective surgery, that's something where hospitals can use to create cash. They provide an operation, they get reimbursed for it. When they have been keeping beds and keeping that elective surgery down, that hurts their cash flow. It actually may help on Medicaid in that fewer procedures are done and funded, but for hospitals that already had a weak cash flow, this is a huge issue. And you can remember, I think it was last fall, we had the issue with Springfield Hospital. We have other institutions out there that are not in great financial shape. Brattleboro Retreat is one of those. And the impacts are going to be institution by institution are going to be, and I don't know if we can come up with solutions that are that way. So that's an issue. Let me, a couple more, and then maybe I'll stop and let people ask questions. There's some smaller need for emergency communication facilities. In Hurricane Irene, we had to provide funding for those types of systems. The Department of Labor and Department of Health are both having staff issues to make sure they can process applicants, 24-hour lines, things like that. And we all know about the sort of securing ventilators is an issue. You can switch the page up and we can stop here and just see if people want to jump in anywhere.
Anyone have questions? They want to jump in? I just have a quick one. The list that you're going through is just general fund.
This is just general fund, and at this point,
fund or anything else. So
right, and I'll take a minute to talk about the education fund and the transportation fund after I finish the general fund list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see if anybody wants to jump in. I don't see anyone. Okay, go ahead.
Great. Okay. Actually, wait to come up. I think we're pretty much through that list. When you slip down a little bit, nutrition programs, you've heard about. One of the issues is, while there is federal money for nutrition programs, the timing of getting that money out is an issue. And the Vermont Food Bank has asked for support until they get their federal funds. So just take a break. One of the things, when we have the shortfall of money in the transportation fund, there's a lot of different states are going different ways of that. And on that, one is they have some states have said, okay, we're going to, given the COVID virus, we're going to curtail our activities because even working outside on roads can create risk. Other states, and I think what Vermont is considering, is a fairly aggressive at using as many dollars as we can muster on the transportation side to do work. And a number of states have said, hey, this is a great time. The roads aren't being used as much. There's more flexibility. Let's get the money out. It's important for the economy. So how that plays out is unclear. We have less money and there'll be different strategies to figure out what to do. The transportation committees and may look at that issue. The education fund, and I really want to save most of this for Mark, is really complex because on the revenue side, we see this tremendous reduction of revenues. Schools are being faced with past budgets. Some of the nutrition programs we think will be covered because of the federal funds. We think that the childcare preschool stuff, there may be some federal money and state resources thrown into that. But there's a lot of other uncertainties. Just to give you a sense of the type of interactions go on, the DAs, which are the agencies that provide a lot of our mental health services, a lot of that's done through the schools. And when the schools closed down, the issue came up is schools would pay DAs on their contract for providing services. Well, now that they're not operating, what happens to the DA services under those? And so from a point of view of a DA, they are seeing revenue loss. And the administration's working with the DAs and with the schools to see whether those services can be provided remotely, whether there's ways to continue them. But there's a tremendous amount of interactions when one institution falls out of that system. Other special needs services are the same types of things. So I'll leave to Mark sort of the immediate education fund impact, but it's totally integrated into the delivery systems of programs. And that's going to be a big issue. I'm taking a break and I want to move into the budget process.
Okay, let me see if there's anyone wants to jump in. Whoops. Don't see anybody.
Great. So where does all this put the budget process, which is there's with revenue uncertainty for 21, and this big budget adjustment that we don't even know what it is because we don't know what our federal resources are. How do we move forward? And I think that there's, and again, I'm just speaking. This is really speaking as me because leadership are going to have to make the call. And I talked to Commissioner of Finance about this a little bit. In many respects, we are just not at a point where we could make decisions on either the budget adjustment or the budget. There's just too much up in the air in the sense of the federal funds, where that's going to be, let alone what the needs are in different agencies. And they're every day we're sort of learning new ones. So, and again, you're just hearing from me, and I don't control anything. I think there's on the purely in my view, I think that you're really talking weeks before you could even begin to, know stuff, maybe longer, but at minimum, not till the, April, where you could do a budget adjustment or a budget. The other thing that's happening is there's a lot of talk about, given we're not going to even know revenues or spending needs until midsummer, do we really pass a full FY21 budget, or do we pass a 3-month or a 4-month or a 6-month base budget built on maybe our spending as far as levels that were in the budget adjustment, and then let that get us through this period of uncertainty, and then have another budget building process in the summer sometime, or early fall. This raises all types of issues which are way over my pay grade, which are an election year and adjournment, and how does that affect people's campaigns, things like that. I don't know enough about that, but on the purely fiscal thing, one of the things we're going to have to think about is how do we deal with revenue forecasting? How do we build a budget in a time when we have this tremendous uncertainty? Should I stop there? And a couple other issues I want to flag, and then we'll be done.
Sure, that's been quite a lot. Let me see if anybody has a question. No. So I'm going to just give people my sense about what we're going to do with the rest of the day. We'll finish Steve's presentation. We will hear from Graham. I think we will also hear from Mark now, maybe go a little over our time slot and not meet this afternoon. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning if that's agreeable with people. Otherwise, we've got this break and then come back, and I'm sort of creating a schedule for tomorrow morning. Okay.
Well, yeah. The last thing I just want to flag as I close that's an issue is what type of discretion the legislature offers to the administration. They've asked for everything from transfer authority up to $1 million between items. And current law says anything over 50,000 has to be approved by the emergency board, made up of the 4 money chairs and the governor. So one of the questions is, do we give added independent authority to the executive branch? And that's something you all will have to think about and decide upon. And the second issue, which is what type of flexibility do we leave during the times when you're not around, or when you can't act? You've actually, in the last week, you put a lot of things in place quickly, but there are going to be times in this process where just like we have the rescission process at joint fiscal, there's limited authority to spend on the part of the emergency board that's never been used. Do we create some sort of ability to address a critical need while the legislature is not in session? So that whole discussion about legislative executive flexibility roles and emergency action is one that's also got to take place. So that's pretty much the end of what I was bringing.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Questions? No, I don't think so.
What
Okay.
a quiet committee. Okay.
I think stunned is maybe the right word. But Steve, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Graham, I think you're next on my list here.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
There's a feedback of some kind.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see.
It's okay. Go ahead. Nobody else hears it. I'm fine.
Which document would you like me, or what would you like me to go over first? I have a document fleshing out some of the revenue implications, and then I also have some considerations for the committee regarding the tax deferrals. I don't know what you think should go first, or whether we should only focus on one or the other. If you got enough from Steve on the revenue side, it's up to you.
You choose. I don't know. I don't know if you
I
heard.
guess maybe I'll start with.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I think I'll start with the revenue implications here, just to sort of piggyback onto Steve's and maybe put a little bit more meat on the bone and on this story.
Hey, Graham.
Yeah.
Graham, if you have your phone near your computer, it sometimes causes feedback.
That's what I'm hearing, I think.
If you could.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
It's in the closet.
They're in the bedroom. Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So yeah, this is a document that Steve and I have put together, essentially flushing out a little bit more of the revenue impacts. And so I'll begin by saying this sheet that I'm going to walk through is only the fiscal year 20 impacts on revenue. So for the next 4 months or so. And that they're very likely to change. And so these are estimates that Tom and Jeff roughly have made as of 8:30 this morning, that we rushed to get into this document, but every day we're getting updates from them, and the changes that they make are in the tens of millions almost every time. And so, expect these numbers to change on a daily basis as we get more information on the curve of the outbreak, some of the administration decisions, but also some of these estimates don't include some tax types in them. They haven't made estimates. They're kind of going through each tax type one by one. So as they do that, then I would expect some of these revenue impacts to go in the more negative direction. And so the third bullet point there is that, like I said, these are not formal estimates. They're more of a possible range of impacts at this point. And the revenue impacts, specifically from the deferral of meals and rooms and sales use tax, they have built some of these into the revenue impacts so far. However, the statement from the Department of Taxes is that deferral will only happen for 2 months. So in theory, that will not necessarily affect fiscal 20, but as Steve said, that's the assumption, is that this won't affect fiscal 20. But to the extent that those go on a little bit longer, it could absolutely have a revenue impact. So I will start with the general fund here. As we are looking at possible revenue reductions of between $200 and $230 million, including the fiscal year transfers from the income taxes. So to put a sense of scale on that, that's about a 39 to 45% drop or transfer in general fund revenues forecasted from March to June. And it's about 15 to 17% of total fiscal year revenues that we're talking about here. So a very large amount of money. But about 150 to 170 million of that is just due to the revenue shift on the personal income tax change in filing dates and payment dates from April 2020 to July. I know that says 2021, but it should say July 2020. And so that includes any payments on personal income tax returns due on April 15th, but also any estimated payments due on April 15th. It does not include any estimated payments due on June 15th, because there's been no guidance about whether that will also be delayed. And so a big chunk of this revenue shift or revenue reduction for fiscal 20 comes from that revenue deferral from the income tax. But then about $70 to $90 million so far, as Tom and Jeff have been working, is coming from just straight reductions in personal and corporate income tax revenue and meals and rooms taxes from just the change in economic activity. So people are staying in hotels less or not at all. They're not going to restaurants. They're not going out to eat. And people are potentially getting laid off or furloughed, so lower withholding taxes. And then some corporations will report smaller estimated payments for April. And so that $70 to $90 million number is what we're sort of calling the economic loss in revenue from the COVID-19 outbreak. The good news is that that loss is going to be partly offset by some unforeseen large corporate tax payments that we received prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, and those were in the area of $30 to $40 million. So some good news there that's sort of being offset, of that 70 to 90 million is being offset by those large corporate income tax payments. However, I would expect the revenue loss in the general fund, if for fiscal 20, the estimates to continue to go to be more of a downgrade, because these estimates don't even include any estimates by Tom and Jeff on some smaller revenue sources for the general fund. So Steve mentioned liquor taxes. So we have liquor taxes that go into the general fund on a monthly basis, but then at the end of the year, there's a direct app from Department of Liquor and Lottery, and it remains to be seen whether that will be the size that we expected it to be. Doesn't include anything on the cigarette or tobacco tax front. So it's likely that these revenue estimates will be even more down for fiscal 20 in the general fund. So I guess I'll pause there and take any questions on the general fund.
Let's see if anybody's got a question. No, doesn't look like it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm afraid I don't have any better news on the transportation or education fund fronts. The transportation fund and the transportation infrastructure bond fund, right now we're looking at a reduction in revenues of about $30 to $40 million for just fiscal 20. That's about a 35% drop in transportation fund revenues estimated from March through June, and about 10 to 14% of total fiscal year 20 revenues. And that loss is mostly due to sort of the loss of economic activity because of weakness in gasoline, diesel taxes, and purchase and use taxes. You know, people aren't driving as much, they're not going out and purchasing vehicles at the moment, but also because the administration's actions to defer payments of some motor vehicle fees during the outbreak. And so that another significant potential revenue reduction. And then moving on to the education fund, just on the non-property tax revenues. So the major revenue sources for the education fund, aside from non-property tax, are the sales and use tax, the meals and rooms tax, of which 25% goes to the education fund, and then the purchase and use tax, which about a third of that goes to the education fund. We're looking at a reduction in just those revenues, about $35 to $45 million at the moment, which is about 20 or so % of revenues forecasted between March and June, and about 6 to 8% of total non-property tax education fund revenues. And again, this is loss that's mostly due to the reduction in economic activity, not anything related to a deferral. And so my third bullet point here is, to the extent that the meals and rooms and sales tax deferrals trickle over or that deferral goes longer than what is currently stated by the Department of Taxes and the administration, this could really balloon the revenue loss here. So at the moment, the payments for March 25th and April 25th are the only things that are delayed. So in theory, what'll happen is we'll get those deferred payments in May. But I think that might be a pretty strong assumption to make at this point in time. But to the extent that we get that money, then it wouldn't necessarily create a fiscal year 20 problem. But if we do end up having to extend those deferrals a bit into fiscal year 21, we're talking about a revenue shift of over potentially $100 million from the education fund. And that's something that I will discuss a little bit more in my subsequent document about tax deferrals. And then also just, and Mark can probably touch on this a little more when he talks, is just some of the deferral of filing dates on the personal income tax side and the Homestead Declaration. Yeah.
Graham, can I interrupt you on the education fund for just a second? The 100 million that you're talking about with the deferral, that's on top of the reduction of 35 to 45 million. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And one other quick question. Is somebody looking at property values, and is that sort of on anybody's radar at the moment, and what might be happening to those?
Not that I'm aware of directly. So it decreases in the grand list at the moment. I don't know how much of that would affect fiscal year 20 revenues at the moment, but it's absolutely a concern to think about.
Thank you.
And I know that Tom and Jeff have made estimates, are looking at decrease in revenue on the property transfer tax.
The other one.
So,
Representative Ansel, I'm going to be meeting with Tom this afternoon on that issue. So
okay,
and follow
good.
up with that.
Okay, great.
Janet, Robin has a question.
Good, Robin.
Can you I'll unmute you.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you. This whole rooms and meals, sales and use, what concerns me, because businesses don't separate that money. If they don't have the money now and they're shut down for the next 2 months, why do we think we're even going to get any of that money?
Yeah, you're raising the same concerns that I have. Or even if they have the money right now and they're using it to make payroll or make expenses right now, that money's going to go away right now.
Right.
And then there's going to be no business in the next 2 months. So why would they have the money in 2 months when they're using it right now? And so I think there could be significant risk to those revenue sources, because I agree, we have the same concerns in our office about that.
So a longer conversation for another time is, do we have businesses segregate these funds so we don't have this problem? But that's not for today.
Right.
Thanks.
Let me see if there's other questions. Anyone? Let me jump in. Okay, go ahead, Graham.
Okay, and then just the final bullet point here is that, and I think Mark can better expound upon these, is that the delay of the Homestead Declaration and the household income form raises additional questions for actual property tax revenues and property tax credits that go out. I think Commissioner Bolio mentioned that there's a non-trivial amount of towns that issue bills in July. And so if someone's not filing until July 1st, it's unclear to me exactly how the credits get onto the bill. And that raises questions of potential underpayment of property taxes or abatements that might arise. But I'm going to let Mark get on those questions a little bit more. But I just wanted to flag it for the committee at this point.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Mark unless I see somebody with a question here, and I don't.
So would you like me to talk about the tax deferral stuff first before we go to Mark, or move to Mark first? What do you think? Whatever is better.
No, we've got you here and you've put your phone away. So why don't you go ahead and talk about it? And then I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention to how many documents you had. So go ahead.
That's fine. All sources got it pulled up. Yeah. So I put together
And we
some.
heard a little
some
bit about this,
thoughts.
Craig, already. So, and from Abby.
Exactly, yeah. These are more what I would call, I might as well have made this presentation called Things That Keep Me Up at Night. Just sort of thoughts that I've had and I've talked over with Steve about some of the issues with some of these filing dates. And so just beginning of on the income tax, for the delay of filing and payments, we all know that it's been delayed to July 15th. That includes homestead declarations, household income forms, personal income tax payments, estimated payments for April 15th, corporate income tax payments, and also fiduciary income tax payments. And as Steve said, the revenue deferral here from April 2020 to July 2020 is in the neighborhood of $145 million. So it creates this major cash flow issue for us as a state in fiscal year 20. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight on this slide is that the delay in the filing deadline is somewhat important in addition to the payment deadline, because it means that the state can't really use accrual accounting in fiscal 20 to solve this cash flow issue. If we had people filing their taxes and saying they owed this amount of money, then at least we could maybe book the money and solve our 20 cash problem by saying this is an accrual basis counting. But because the filing deadline is also delayed, that's not an option for us anymore. And so at this point, it's kind of unclear how that problem gets solved. So do we borrow the money against ourselves? Should we end the year deficit? Well, we don't have a balanced budget requirement, but it raises questions about where the borrowing would come from and how it might impact our bond rating. So lots of outstanding questions about how that cash flow problem in fiscal 20 from just that income tax deferral gets solved for budgeting purposes. Moving on to the next slide, Sorsha. These are other things that I think are important for the committee to think about. The first one would this deferral extend to the June 15th estimated payments deadline? The federal government has not prepared saying that that's an issue.
Can I interrupt here? For some reason, I don't know if it is for everybody, but you're tuning out on mine. Looks like it is for Robin as well and others. So
I think it might be an internet connection issue. My internet's been kind of going in and out today.
You know what I'm going to do, Graham, given that, because I'm losing a good part of it. I'm going to switch to Mark at the moment, and then we'll get you back. If not this morning, we'll get you back tomorrow, just because we want to be able to hear what you're saying. Okay.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. So now I'm on Mark, and I think Scott had to get off the call because his Wi-Fi wasn't working as well. Am I right? I think that's right.
Yes, I think he was trying to get back on, but was having internet issues.
Okay, well, so I'm gonna ask the committee to help me out here. Do people need a break? Do you want to come back? At what time did we have slotted to come back? Came back?
I'm okay to go straight through.
I am, but I'm just checking with everybody.
Yeah, I'm okay to go straight through too.
Okay, so let's go ahead and continue, and then we'll reconvene tomorrow. Before I lose anybody else, though, I want to mention that tomorrow, one of the things that we're going to do is get training on Everbridge, which is the remote voting platform that's being proposed for the House. So I think we'll probably do that first thing when we get together tomorrow, which I believe is also at 10. So should nod your head or tell me yes or something. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So at 10 o'clock, we'll get training on Everbridge. We'll go back to Graham, and I can say with absolute certainty that we will pick up markup again, because I don't think we'll hear everything that we need to hear on this. And I also asked people to let me know, let Saoirse and me know if there are witnesses that you feel we need to hear from this week. I don't know whether we'll be in a position to make decisions this week in any event, but I just want to get a sense of what people feel that they need to have in the way of information. So you can just do that with a text or an email or something. Okay. That okay with everybody? Head nodding. Okay, good. All right.
I have my hand up, Janet. Janet, I have
yeah.
my hand up, please.
I can't see you, Cynthia, so I'm happy to recognize you. Go ahead.
Thank you.
I just see your
I-
ceiling.
I expect to be in the State House tomorrow, and I would assume I can participate in this meeting through the State House system. Would that be correct?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but Saoirse will get back to you about it, or I will.
I will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Saoirse?
Oh, I just wanted to say that IT just contacted me and said if we're having trouble with the audio, if we shut off our videos, that will help our IT connection. Not all of us, but just the speaker that's having difficulty with the audio. They could pause their video, that's all.
So if I'm having trouble hearing, I should shut off my video.
No, if we're having trouble hearing Graham, he could
He
go
should
to
shut
audio
his
only.
off. Got it.
That might
Okay.
help.
Okay. I'm going to go to Mark anyway, because I want to be able to get some of the Ed Fund information in front of us. So we'll do that. Okay, Mark.
Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I am going to walk you through some of the education finance issues that we've been wrestling with that are related to the COVID-19 outbreak. And I'm going to start by picking up on where Graham left off and talk a little bit about the related losses of education fund revenue in FY 2020 first.
Hey, Mark,
Yes.
do you have a document that I can share? I haven't gotten anything.
Okay, no, I did not yet send you a document. I have a draft I'm working on that outlines the issues that I'm going to go over now, and I will get that posted and out to people as soon as I can.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so again, starting with revenue losses in FY 2020, total education fund sources that we've been working with, the sources that we thought we had prior to the outbreak were about $1.7 billion. 2/3 of that money are accounted for by education property tax revenues, and the remainder of that, about 1/3 of the total revenues, are non-property tax revenues. So I'll take those one at a time. Most education property tax revenues for 2020 have already been collected by municipalities, and they're either in the bank or have already been paid to school districts. However, because we have a very decentralized education property tax collection system, each municipality has its own billing schedule. And at present, some municipalities still have outstanding tax payments due for 2020. We took a little bit of a detailed look on that, and in total, there's about 73 municipalities that have between 1/4 and 1/2 of their education tax collections still outstanding at this point. And fully, 21 of the municipalities have only collected 1/2. So whether or not that money we're going to be able to actually collect that money, I think is uncertain. It's going to depend on, COVID-19 related layoffs and business losses and how individuals are affected, whether they can pay those last payments that are going to be coming due between now and the end of the current fiscal year. And again, we may be able to figure out exactly how much of that revenue is outstanding, but at this point, we don't know exactly how much. The non-property tax revenues that account for about 1/3 of the revenues are now, based on the information just got from Graham, are expected to fall between $35 and $45 million in FY 20. Those three taxes, the sales and use, purchase and use, and the meals and rooms taxes, account for the lion's share of non-property tax revenues in the education fund. In addition to that loss of revenues, and again, Graham already addressed this, There's the issue about the deferral of the meals and use tax for the, for the next few months, and whether or not that money is actually collected on June 25th, when the administration has proposed the employers would make 4 payments of meals and rooms tax is uncertain. That also possibly raises another cash flow issue, which I'll address when I get to that part.
Janet,
Yeah.
it looks like Jim has raised his hand.
Ah, Jim,
Right.
go for it.
Mark, question.
Yep.
When you say most of the ed taxes are already collected, but some are not, Thetford, for example, our due date is October 15. Are we in the category of not collected yet?
Yeah, I would say so. Do you know how many payments you have?
Just one.
Just one. Just one, really? Okay,
Yep,
I'm not
just
sure
one.
about that. Most districts have between 1 and 4. Most districts have one payment, already have all the payment in the bank. So you may have already made your,
Well, we're an
you
outlier.
may have already collected 100% of your property tax revenue for the year, but I can check on that for you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to not confuse people who ask questions.
Okay, then, so unless there's any other questions, I'll move on to COVID-related spending by school districts in 2020. So the governor ordered the dismissal of schools through April 6th. And during the period of dismissal, schools are directed to, school employees are directed to continue to come into work, either in person or remotely, depending on the needs of the district and guidance of public health care officials. But schools have been directed to continue to pay all school staff, including hourly employees, and to continue making pre-kindergarten tuition payments to private providers. So, their ongoing costs are continuing. In addition to that, school districts have been asked to provide some additional services that they don't normally provide during this dismissal period. And I won't go into a lot of detail on these other than just tick them off. And they're, district-based options for childcare for essential employees, meal services for for kids who need it, continuing services for students with disabilities or special needs, systems for ensuring maintenance of education for students, and even cleaning and disinfecting school grounds. So looking at those costs, I don't expect the impact on the education fund in 2020 to be very large. And in addition to that, school districts remain eligible for federal and state reimbursements for school meals. And the administration's also indicated that school districts that require supplemental funding for childcare services provided to essential workers will also be reimbursed. But at this point, I don't know what the source of the money is, and I don't know how much money will be available. If, as now seems likely, it becomes necessary to close schools beyond April 6th or even for the remainder of the school year, school districts are going to be asked to provide more formal education services to students for the remainder of the school year. Schools are going to be required to create continuing education plans for all students and to continue to deliver educational services to the extent possible through various remote and virtual means. So they have a full plate. But for FY 2020, since school budgets are set, since tax rates have been set, since everything's basically done, we're well into the school year, into the fiscal year. If any additional funding is required by school districts, they're going to have to find it by reallocating existing funds. They're going to have to use reserve funds if they have any, and word is that reserves are pretty thin at this point. Or they're going to have to run a deficit in FY 2020. Running a deficit is problematic because that deficit then just rolls forward right into FY 21 and will have to be dealt with in that fiscal year. In terms of cash flow issues for the Ed Fund, prior to the outbreak, the Education Fund was projected to close FY 2020 with a full stabilization reserve of about $36 million. And in addition to that, we were projecting a surplus of about $13 million. So all told, about $49 or $50 million is available in either surplus or reserve funds at that point. So without additional funding coming into the fund, first of all, the surplus will get used up as a result of that loss of revenues. And since that's only 13 million, and we're looking at a $35 to $45 million shortfall, the education fund would run a significant operating deficit, and the stabilization reserve would have to be tapped in order to get out of FY 2020 whole. So that is basically, all the information I have for 2020. I'm going to go on and talk about the problems that we're likely to face in terms of trying to set education tax rates in FY 2020. But are there any questions on FY 2020 at this point?
See. George has a question.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for that, I think. But when you talked about the $35 to $45 million decrease in non-property tax revenues, what was the time frame for that?
That's Tom Covette's estimate of the revenues that we would lose in FY 2020 through the 3 sales taxes.
So current year.
It's in the current year, right? And so that's what I'm saying. So because spending is set, tax rates are set, everything's basically locked in for 2020. Any revenue shortfall that we face that wasn't anticipated is going to fall right to the bottom line. That will use up the existing reserve we have. It will also require dipping into the education fund stabilization reserve. Okay.
Janet, Cynthia also has a question.
Go ahead.
Cynthia has a question.
Oh, Cynthia, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate what Jim was saying. Arlington collect property taxes in November, one collection. My understanding is that collection is for the year past because the town borrows against that expected revenue to finance things until then. So I'm not quite clear about Mark saying, well, everything's been collected. I need to have clarification. Maybe Thetford and Arlington are the complete outliers, but if there are other towns that have not collected their tax revenue, I think we should expect that they will not collect everything they would have anticipated in prior circumstances. So I really need to have clarification in this whole timing issue.
Okay, I'm not sure I caught all of that, but we have taken a look at that a little bit there. And for more detailed information, we have 21 municipalities that collected only half of their education property tax. 7 municipalities have collected, have yet to collect 1/3, and 45 municipalities have yet to collect 1/4. If it would be helpful, we can probably estimate the amount of tax statewide that's still outstanding, if that would be helpful. Haven't done that yet.
So Mark, it sounds to me as though there is a need for some information about which municipalities are where.
Yeah.
And unless I'm misunderstanding, I think if your due date was last fall, you've collected the money for the fiscal year that we're in already. Right?
Yes.
You wouldn't be one of those municipalities that has yet to collect. But if you would, so both Thetford and Arlington have already done all their collecting. They would
Right.
worry about next fall for
Right.
fiscal 21. But if you would clarify that for people, I think it would be useful. I think that probably there are a lot of questions statewide about the timing.
Yeah, and we have all the information because we know the number of installments districts have and what their due dates are.
Good.
So
Okay.
we can go back and do that. Yeah, okay. No more questions. Okay. So then moving on to FY 21. There's not a
Actually,
whole,
Cynthia has her hand up again.
Good. Okay, Cynthia.
I'm sorry, I'm just getting so confused about budget years, calendar years, fiscal years, when we collect the tax revenues, what year they cover. Something is like just sliding underneath my feet. So I'm not questioning what Mark is saying, but there's a big confusion here that has to be straightened out in terms of this timing issue, because what you guys are saying is not consistent with what I understood. So we really have an issue here.
Good. We'll get information out.
That would be good.
okay, so in terms of
Anyone else want to jump in? Have a question? No. Okay, go ahead.
okay, setting tax rates for FY 21. Normally, prior to adjournment, the legislature sets property and income yields as well as the non-homestead property tax rate for the upcoming fiscal year. This year, at least right now, it's going to be very difficult to do that for a number of reasons. But first of all, I want to point out that voters have already weighed in on education spending in FY 2021 in most communities. I think that 94 school districts were approved earlier this month. Those voters approved education spending increase of about $62 million. And there's an additional about $11 million in payments out of the education fund in addition to the education payments. So all told, we're looking at an increase in spending right now of about $73 million next year. I don't know how you can undo that at this point since school boards have already gone out and voted. Another complication is that there were 9 school districts that had budgets defeated. Their school boards are going to have to reconfigure their budgets and resubmit them to their voters. And I don't know how soon that can happen in the current environment. And in addition to that, there are, I think, 5 school districts that have not yet voted. They normally don't vote during town meeting week, they vote later. But again, they're going to have to deal with the social distancing and all that stuff when they go ahead and vote. Third thing, COVID-19 related revenue losses are expected to be significantly higher in FY21 than they are now. I don't have any estimates from Tom Cadet or anybody else that would indicate how much they are, but if we're dealing with $35 to $45 million in the current fiscal year, it's likely to be more severe next year for the non-property tax revenues that come in, and whether municipalities are going to be able to collect the education property tax that they need to remit to the state is going to depend on how deep and long the recession lasts and to what extent individuals that are facing unemployment because of layoffs or businesses that are having losses are going to be able to make those payments in a timely fashion. Let's see what else. So as Abby mentioned earlier this morning, there are default yields in place in the event that the legislature decides to adjourn without setting them for this year. Those default rates are for the non-homestead property tax $1.59, which is lower than the tax rates that we've been looking at so far. But you get the opposite thing going on in terms of the homestead tax, because last year's yields are lower than the yields that we've been looking at for FY 2021 so far. So what would happen is non-homestead property taxpayers would see a lower education property tax, but homestead property taxpayers would see an increase. Net, the fund would be down about $14 or $15 million if those went forward. That's about all I can tell you about FY 2021 at this point. If there aren't any questions on that, I can just touch briefly on the last issue that Graham raised, which is the tax department's proposal or plan to leave the filing deadline, move the filing deadlines for the Homestead Declaration and the property tax adjustment claim until July 15th. I know the tax department is working on a proposal for it. And I also know that they recognize that a potential problem with it is getting tax bills out in a timely fashion in FY 2020, or not actually getting the bills out, but getting the property tax credit information out to municipalities early enough for them to get that information on the bills that they send to taxpayers on their various schedules. I don't want to really spitball at this point, but if that solution does not work for some reason, I know that we had different protocols in place for both the Homestead Declaration and the property tax adjustment claim in the first few years after Act 60 passed. At one point in time, Homestead Declarations did not need to be filed annually. We used a prior year's Homestead Declaration, and people were only required to file in the event that their classification changed during the year. And we also made property tax credit claim payments to individuals by sending out checks, which I know is probably an awful lot of work for the tax department, but we did do it. And those checks were sent out later in the year, much later than we need to send them now in order to get them on the tax bills. And those checks were sent directly to taxpayers. I don't know if that's a possibility or what, but anyways. And
it looks like Cynthia has a question. And if Cynthia doesn't mind, I'm going to pause your video feed to see if it improves the sound.
Yes, my question is, when Mark said that if we went to the default rates, there would be a net decrease to the education fund of 14 to 15 million. Did he mean aside from any other losses due to other revenue sources going down?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch all that. I'm sorry.
When you said that going to the default property tax rates would lead to a decline in revenue of about $15 million, did you mean aside from any other revenue decline?
Yes. That would be, yeah, that wouldn't reflect any defaults on education tax payments or any non-property tax revenue shortfalls. And again, I just could say it's a very preliminary number. When we were looking at it, it depends what you compare back to. And there's different ways of doing that. And we're working on some scenarios, right? Some scenarios that we can show you right now, but you can just look at the education fund balance sheets that we've been looking at, and you can see that the yields in FY 2020 are lower than what we've been using for 2021. And the $1.59 for non-homestead tax rate is actually lower than the tax rates we've been looking at for FY 2021 now.
It would be nice to have a new education fund outlook.
Yes, we can try to work with that, but part of the problem with coming up with an outlook is I don't know at this point what we're going to be closing FY 2020 with. If we use all of the surplus and the education fund stabilization reserve to get through 2020, we're going to be dealing with sort of an empty cupboard in FY 2021. In other words, we'd have no reserves, declining revenues, and increasing revenues. So. Increasing spending, excuse me.
Janet, Peter has a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter. He's still muted.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute him. Peter, can you unmute?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. It's my question is a bit more global than just for Mark. It seems like one of the challenges for us and for you folks, as well as Steve Klein, is the unpredictability, uncertainty was his word. I'm just wondering whether or not, in an effort to try and impose a little more predictability, whether we are really stuck, as it were. That is to say, we're impotent in the face of the change of all these dates coming from the federal government to July 15th. I can imagine a date that's after April 15th, but before July 15th, if we were able or willing to chart our own independence in these very uncertain times. Thank you.
Is there anyone else has a question? Wants to jump in? No? Okay. Go ahead, Mark. You done?
Oh, I am pretty much done. I think Representative Maslin has a question.
Oh, gosh, I didn't see him. I'm keep scrolling through here and I missed him. Go ahead, Jim. Nope, you're muted.
Let me unmute myself. There we go.
There you
Okay.
go.
I just want to compliment Peter on wearing a tie today. But okay, let's go back to work. Thanks.
Be sure you mute again when you're done. Any other questions anyone has? I'm going to make an observation, which is probably the most difficult issue that we're going to deal with this year is, well, they're all going to be really hard, but dealing with the education fund and the property tax rates and school spending is, I can't quite even pull all the threads on it. So, all right, Mark. Jim, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mute.
You're still muted.
Yeah. Throughout all of these presentations, it's occurred to me and probably everybody here that how we tell taxpayers in our towns how we're handling income sensitivity, property taxes, ed taxes, all that sort of stuff is, as Janet just implied, is going to be absolutely crazy. So when it is possible to tell us something concise or reasonably, well, consistent with what we know, so that we can tell something to people in our town, that would be very, very helpful. I'm already getting inquiries about income sensitivity payments and property taxes and school budgets, and I'm sure everybody is. So I'm sure my inquiries aren't special. But anyway, when y'all collectively can tell us something, it would be very much appreciated. And that's it for now. Thanks.
I can address that a little bit. It raises a good point that I didn't address when I was walking through my outline, and that is that property tax credits for FY21 will be based on household income in 2019. So any impact on household income due to business layoffs or business closures is not going to be reflected in the property tax adjustment that people get next year. It will be reflected in their FY22 education property tax bill.
I think you've got, I think you're confusing fiscal years and tax years, and that may be confusing for people. The income you had in fiscal 19 is going to affect the credit you get in this current year, not this current fiscal year, but this current year.
No, your income, your household income in calendar year 2019,
right?
What is going to determine your property tax adjustment or your property tax credit in FY 2021.
You're talking fiscal year and tax year. So just to be really clear for people, the income you had last year is going to determine the credit that you get in the current calendar year, which is going to be fiscal year 21, but it's the calendar year 20. So it felt like we were skipping a year. So
and just from taxpayers' perspective, when they get their tax bill next year, even if they've lost their job or have business losses, they're not going to see an adjustment in their tax bill to account for that.
Their tax bill this year.
Yes.
Not next year. This year.
FY20. What's year this year? 2020 or
this year is the calendar year we're in right now. Calendar year. People are going to get bills hopefully in July. And it's going to be based on on their income in 2019.
Yes.
Yes. I know you're talking fiscal year, and you're right, but that's not how people are thinking about it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Other points that I don't know if you're through your presentation.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to see if there's other questions that people have. Jim, I just want to go back to your comment. You're right. We need to be letting people know as early as we can. I think some of it is information we're going to get from fiscal staff and others. Some of it at some point is our decisions we're going to have to make.
Janet, Cynthia has a question.
Yeah, Cynthia. Go ahead.
Thank you. Could you lay out for me what you are planning? Are you planning sessions every day? What is our plan for the rest of this week?
Well, so I think what I'd like to do is to have people hold this time slot, the 10 to 11:30. We ran over this morning, and we may need to do that. So rather than do a morning and an afternoon session. So plan to be available at 10 o'clock the rest of this week. And things are happening so very rapidly that I can't give you a much firmer schedule. What I did say before though, and I'm not, in case you weren't at a point where you could hear it, tomorrow morning we will get trained on Everbridge, which is the remote voting system, which may get used in the House. We're not sure about that yet. We will go back to Mark and maybe try to wrestle through some of these issues that he's laid out for us. And I also would like people to let me know if there are people you want to hear from. Do you want to hear from The league, they've certainly got issues on municipal taxes. You know, the Superintendent's Association, the Agency of Education is one that I've thought of. But send me a text or send me an email if there's somebody that you feel could give us information that would help us navigate through this.
Okay, I will hold that time, but you should also know that I do not find this method of working satisfactory at all. I know it's what we have to do now, but I don't believe I'm going to be able to fulfill my obligations as a representative working this way and even voting this way. I don't believe that's going to work. So if we can't get together yet, then we're just going to have to wait and not do anything until we can get together. So I'm willing to try, I'm willing to work with it, but this is very hard with the connections going in and out and other kinds of problems. And I don't think it's going to work.
Well, I appreciate that. And I so much appreciate that people are trying to do it. It is hard for all of us. I find it tiring. I can't, you can't move around and you're not, it feels very different. So I hear what you're saying. We're going to have to figure out ways to get our work done, and we will tweak things as we move forward as best we can. Anybody else want to jump in? George and Bill, and I can't tell if Sam is raising his hand. He is. Okay. George, Bill, and Sam. George, you go ahead.
Okay. The frightening news today that may have some effect on whether we can actually get back into the State House was that they've discovered on those cruise ships that the COVID was staying live for up to 17 days in those cabins. Previously we thought 3 days was where we were, but it was up to 17 days with live COVID. And so that, that may make it much harder for us to actually get back together physically.
Thanks. Bill.
Yes. Any documents that Sorsha could send us ahead of time? I printed off a couple today that were most helpful.
Good.
And as Cynthia said, an outlook would be really good. So thank you.
Good. Sam?
Am I live? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My question is more of kind of a committee discussion thing. I mean, I don't know how our yield bill, I mean, normally we have a crossover, but I mean, are we going to pass anything or just so that the Senate can think about it? Or do we just wait until we have more information? I don't know. I mean, I didn't have a ton of questions today. Actually, I had 1 million questions today, but it's just, I mean, what can we do? I don't even know that there's an answer to that. So but just process wise, I'm just trying to think about what we should do.
Yeah, I think we all should be thinking about that. I go back and forth between doing nothing, letting the defaults control, waiting for more information, doing, what we thought was going to happen. And I don't know what the right answer is. So I guess I'd ask everybody to be thinking about it between today and tomorrow. And we'll come up with something that the committee can support. But I'm not sure I know what the path is. Others want to weigh in?
Peter seems to have a question.
Peter, go ahead.
I think the more certainty we can impose, the better. And I'm just wondering if the tax commissioner couldn't repeat publicly what he told us, namely, if you're able to file and you can file, now's the time to do it, regardless of how the dates have moved. And I can't help wanting to get an answer one way or the other, whether we are stuck with those dates that the federals seem to have transported on us, or whether we do have any independence of judgment. Because I think particularly for the towns and the homestead versus home site or non-homestead, this is really problematic to go to July. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Yes, I've got one.
Joey?
Joey?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not clear. I think I heard that if we go to the default rate, we decrease our money by 14 or $15 million. But I was wondering, how much do we have in the reserve fund?
Mark, do you want to answer? Let's see if Mark's still there. Mark?
I'm sorry. can you
I'll
hear me
ask
now?
again tomorrow.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
The Education Fund Stabilization Reserve currently has about $37 million in it. And in addition to that, we had a $13 million surplus. This was all anticipated prior to this, COVID-19 issues. So that there is almost $50 million in there.
Cynthia has a question as well.
Can I just get a clarification from Mark on that last thing, though, that if that we also are losing $45 million of sales tax revenue, right? Or
Yes, that's what I meant. That was prior to any of this COVID-19 issue. So that shortfall of 35 to 45 million would be partially offset by the surplus that's in the education fund, the 13 million. The remainder would then have to be picked up by using the stabilization reserve unless we have some other outside source of revenue coming in.
Okay. I didn't hear who it was who had a question. Sorcia.
It's Cynthia.
Cynthia, go ahead.
Thank you. I have two things. One is going back to the question of the trust taxes and the question of the deferral of the collection and would we ever collect that? Would we abate it? And the equity issues in terms of companies that already paid what was due. I think that's a very difficult issue because the money actually doesn't belong to the companies, and abating it, I just think we really need to be careful about that. I think, Janet, you raised some issues about that. And then the other thing just to keep in mind is that if you're in a recession, which is what we are likely to be in, the worst thing to do is to raise taxes. So I think we may have to deficit spend or do some creative things until we can bring the economy out of the coma that it's going to be put into. But raising taxes is the worst thing to do when you're in a recession, and that includes property taxes.
Other comments or questions anyone has before we close for the day? I know this, just to state the obvious, this is really, really tough stuff. So we're sort of circling around the really hard issues. Jim, it looked like you wanted to jump in. Am I right? Jim?
Yep, thank you. Early on in the, first talk about budget, whatever, stimulus from whatever you want to call it, COVID money from Washington, D.C., there was mention in the president's press release about money for states. When might we know if whatever that might be and how it might be distributed? And I understand there's probably no answer for a while, but at some point in time, it would be nice to hear something about that when there is something concrete to tell us. And I'll wait until someone knows.
So I also thinking about time, I think we're going to have to sign off because of our tech support and so on. I think I had one more question there. Was it you, Bill?
Yes.
Okay, you go ahead, and then I'm going to end the meeting, and we'll pick up tomorrow morning at 10. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, this is probably unrelated, but I'm getting a lot of calls about essential businesses. Who should I direct them to? Businesses that would like to be included in the essential business list.
I'm going to take a stab at this. At the moment, the notion of an essential worker is only the childcare school, thing. I don't know. Well, I shouldn't say that. Have them talk to somebody in the administration. Somebody got a better answer than I'm coming up with there.
You could use the form, but I mean.
Thank you. Yeah, the form is good. Good idea. Yeah. Things are changing so quickly, Bill, that I might have known the answer yesterday and I don't know the answer today. But the form is a good idea.
Okay. Thank you.
Kendall?
Kendall, yeah. Joey?
Will we have a new call-in number tomorrow, or will it be the same?
Sorcia is going to push out an invitation just the way she did today, and then she'll also have a call-in number.
It'll be the same every time we meet, actually, but I'll keep sending it out before every meeting.
That's very wise.
She'll do a reminder, and it's 10 o'clock tomorrow. And Sorcia has been doing a ton of stuff, and so I know she's available because I've been taking advantage of it. So
Actually, we're going to let Sorcia set Joey's alarm remotely.
Yeah. All right.
It was great seeing all of you guys.
It was great. I'm glad you're in San Francisco.
And I wanted to tell George that I went to the Geezer hours this morning at Price Chopper, and they had peanut butter stuffed pretzels on sale, so I bought a jar.
That's lovely. You can eat them with us. We're on YouTube still, so I'm gonna end the meeting, and we will see you all